once again to another Geek Culture Congress. My name is Louis Speedy Jr. Gonzalez, and I have on the phone a very special guest. I have Ron Kasman here, who is the creator of the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks. Welcome, Ron, to Geek Culture Congress.
Hi, Luis. I'm really happy to be part of this.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time to talk about your project, the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks. So I did actually check out the first issue, and I really enjoyed the story, man. I really enjoyed the premise. I'll let you, without me actually spoiling it, I'd rather let you explain to our listeners your inspiration for it. Why did you make it? The motivations for you that gave you the idea for this.
Okay. We've got a few questions there.
Yeah.
Let me start with this. It's a lot easier to write out a plot synopsis than to actually sit down and draw it. I did the whole thing. I lettered it.
Wow, yes, you did.
And I put color on it as well. I don't know if I could call myself a colorist, but I did tone it with color. It's extremely time-consuming to do the drawing and the inking and the lettering and the coloring. And it takes a while to get a sharp story there, too. But it doesn't take long to write out a plot synopsis. And I had 5 different plot synopsises ready, very different topics. And I was thinking, which one of these things am I going to do? And I decided to do the one that would have some commercial potential, but also be enjoyable to draw. I didn't want to sit around drawing things I didn't care about all the time.
Right.
So this one is about a topic I'm aware of. I'm an old guy. When I sit at the conventions, I did this one.
We're all young. Even if we're old, we try and stay young with all this, right?
Actually, the opposite holds true for me. Okay. I was old even when I was young.
Oh, goodness.
And right now, I'm coming to terms with my age perfectly. Mm-hmm. So I sat at a convention or watched 100 people walk by.
Right.
And all of them looked younger than me. Most of them were much younger than me. Mm-hmm. That's not a disadvantage in life. I looked at them and I thought about all the things that I know that they just couldn't possibly know.
Right.
And one of them is how they got to where they were at the convention.
Right. How did conventions start when they originally started? And
well, I live in Toronto.
Right.
And there's a convention in Toronto now that has 130,000 people going to it for the weekend.
Wow.
And I assume that's turnstiles. That's I assume that if someone goes for the weekend, there are 3 people. But still, no matter how you measure 130,000 people, it's an awful lot of people.
Yeah, it is.
And what the people didn't know there was that it didn't start that way. It had to grow out of something.
Yeah.
And I am the co-chair of the first. I'm here in Toronto,
right?
And I'm the co-chair of the first Canadian comic book convention, which was called Cosmic-Con at York University in 1972. Before that, I went to a Detroit Triple Fanfare. Detroit's about 200 miles from Toronto. I went to a Detroit Triple Fanfare in 1970, where I saw and talked to Jim Steranko, and talking to people now, people who are under 40 don't remember Jim Steranko. He was the biggest thing around in 1970. It was a thrill to meet him. I met Dan Adkins. I got a sketch from Dan Adkins, which I still own. I met Bernie Wrightson, and I got to know him just a little bit better over the years. These guys were 3 of the corners of the comic book professional community.
Right.
They were doing beautiful work. And as wonderful as the Detroit Comic Convention was, I then went to a New York Comic Convention in 1971. Mm-hmm. And people call those the Phil Suling conventions because he was the guy who organized it.
Okay.
I know that there's at least one book in the works on Phil Suling now. He was very much he was a large man, but he was very, very quick-witted, very interesting to be around. He filled up a room. That's why people remember them as the Phil Suling conventions, not as they were called the New York Comic Art Conventions. So I drove down to the 1971 Comic Art Convention.
All the way from Canada, Toronto. That's just probably 8-hour drive?
Oh, if you're good at it, if you're taking breaks
back in the
every
day,
once in a while,
it's probably like 12-hour drive. Yeah,
it seems that every time I drive to New York, it's 12 hours.
yeah, that sounds about right.
And it's about 500 miles from Toronto.
Right.
New York at the time was Sodom and Gomorrah put together.
Yeah,
it led the way in social decay. It was about as bad as a city could be. And Toronto was a very innocent city. We didn't have much of a character at the time, but when we pretended to have one, we were called Toronto the Good. And we're kind of still Toronto the Good.
It's kind of like going from like a culture shock, kind of.
It was a complete culture shock.
Wow.
Toronto is still a city that is a peaceful city.
Right.
We're an enormous city now. We're bigger than Chicago. At the time, we were the second largest city in Canada after Montreal. Now we're by far the largest population center in Canada. We've got a beautiful downtown core. We have urban sprawl all over the place. But the problems that exist in some of the large American cities don't really exist here. I don't know why that is. We're also the most multicultural city in the world.
Wow.
So the city that I left in 1971 is nothing like the city that exists today. We called ourselves Toronto the Good because we actually didn't have stores open on Sunday. The day was... Someone decided at one time that Sunday would be reserved for church going. And that stayed for a long time. Nothing open on Sundays.
Very interesting.
And in this city, in this peaceful city, Toronto the Good. And it sounds like I'm lying. I'm not lying.
No, I believe it. I believe it.
I was born in 1953. Shortly before that, in the late 40s, they changed the law about no swinging in the parks on Sunday. And people would actually come around, I suppose, on Saturday night and lock the swings to the side of the device that held up the swings in the park. So you could not swing on a Sunday.
Goodness. Okay.
So we were loosening up, but we were still Toronto the Good.
Right.
And I'd never seen anything like New York. When I came into New York, the first thing that we went through a tunnel, and then we went into an incline. And at the top of an incline, there was what we today call a squeegee kit. Some lady came up to my car and started cleaning the windshield. I didn't know what to do.
They
so
still
she put
do
out
that, by
her
the
hand,
way.
the universal symbol for give me some money.
They still do that, by the way.
I gave her a quarter. I didn't know what to do. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Who knows what you would have done otherwise? Probably nothing. But we were just we were rubes. We were a bunch of kids from the sticks.
Right. So it was definitely a new experience then.
So
and I see that you put that
I put that in the first
issue. Yes,
I did. Now, if I just wrote down the story of me at the Phil Suling convention, it would have bored everyone to tears. I mean, you can't just say, this happened to me. Wasn't that wonderful?
Right. But
I guess that's what I'm doing right now. But hopefully your listeners can stand it for 5 minutes.
They'll be all right. They'll be okay.
You're not gonna read a 216-page book.
That's right.
Which is an autobiography of my great weekend in New York. It just doesn't work that way. It's got to have a backbone. So the plot is, if 5 guys go down, and each guy has his own idiosyncrasies. The guys I went with were not terribly idiosyncratic. They were just a bunch of comic fans. That's all we were. We were just average guys going to high school, a bit worried about the future, who really liked comic books. That's why we were driving 500 miles. And the fellows in the story are quite idiosyncratic. At the time, homosexuality had just been legalized in Canada.
I see.
So for the first time, it was legal to be gay, and it had only been that way for 4 years. People who were gay were still really scared.
Right.
It might have been legal, but it wasn't. It was
definitely
normal.
taboo in 1971.
Oh, it was tough.
Yeah.
So one of the guys in the car is gay, and one of the guys in the car is learning disabled but wants to be a comic artist.
Right.
He might make it. He's quite good, but he's not much good at anything else. He has no social skills at all. One of the guys is the ultimate capitalist who wants to hustle comic books for a living.
Right.
And one of the guys is the son of a pornographer in Toronto. And he's going down to New York to check out plentiful stores of pornography so he can get his dad to bring it back.
I see.
And he's even thinking of opening up his own movie house. Then guy number 5 is the protagonist.
Right.
And this is sort of like Donald Duck in the comics. Have you read Donald Duck yourself?
Yeah, when I was a child, yeah.
Just when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Uncle Scrooge has the power of money.
Right.
The 3 nephews have the power of science through the Junior Woodchuck.
Mm-hmm.
Gladstone Gander has the power of luck.
Right.
Donald has no power.
No, he's just the bystander.
He's just the average person.
He moves the plot along.
That's
the
one
comedy
theory
along.
of storytelling.
Yeah.
That you have somebody in the story who's just Mr. Average, and the story revolves around him.
Now,
he's nothing special. He's just another worried 18-year-old.
Right. Before you continue, now these, I like what I like about the archetypes that you have created of these characters is kind of like you kind of created an archetype of comic book fans, in their own way, in each character in the story in the beginning, and these 5 guys. There's kind of like that. There's the guy who wants to hustle comic books, who likes to slab them and put them on eBay and make the money. They got the guy who's the artist trying to do his own thing. You have you kind of put kind of like the archetype of a normal comic book fan, more or less, maybe back in those days, but still you included them in these 5 characters. Now, these characters, were they inspirations of people that you actually knew?
No.
Or this is just you wrote these characters? Okay, this character's going to be like this. Maybe Anglomams of different people you've met.
Well, they're probably all something about me.
I see.
The quiet guy. Mm-hmm. I'm not gay, but I'm quiet. Right. And then I say to myself, well, why is he so quiet? I mean, why is my character so quiet? I've got to do something with him to make him quiet. And thus came the gay thing.
Right.
The pornography, I actually had an uncle. He's long passed. But my uncle owned a smutty newspaper.
I see. So
I was familiar with what went on with smutty newspapers.
Exactly.
Now I know his son is still around. I know him well. He doesn't care. He never did care about smutty newspapers, but it was an extrapolation of what it must have been like.
Right.
To be around that constantly.
Very cool.
The capitalist, that was definitely me. I was hustling comics back and forth.
Right.
The guy who could draw a bit, I could draw a bit back then. No way was I going to get anywhere with it. And and
until now, until you made your own project. See.
Well, over the years, I've been published about 85 times.
Very cool.
And most people, I used to work for DC as a letterer.
Okay.
I worked for Image in the first wave as a letterer.
Oh, cool.
I'm not a bad letterer.
You were in the all or nothing days of Image.
Well,
huh?
yeah, I guess you could call it the all or nothing days. I can draw a little bit. I can ink a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I can letter. No one's going to take that one away from me.
Good.
So I have been published a fair bit. But I look at guys who are drawing regularly for Marvel or DC.
Right.
And I say to myself, those are not the things I know how to do.
Right.
Now, I look at Tintin, I look at Archie, and I also look at Marvel from about 1973 and say, well, I'm not Hergé, and I didn't work for Marvel in 73, but I can combine elements of that to create a unique style.
Yeah, it's definitely very unique. Like when I was looking at the art, it's like it reminds me of kind of like almost looking at a Steve Ditko, Spider-Man comic book back in the day. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
it definitely has that
feel.
feel.
Influenced by Ditko,
right?
Maybe by default. When Ditko drew Spider-Man, the drawings of Spider-Man just flowed.
Right.
He'd have him swinging through the air. I've never seen anything more beautiful. But when Peter Parker was talking to what was Liz Allen or Flash Thompson.
Yeah, whatever supporting character was.
It was usually a fairly straight-on shot.
Right.
And they were usually a little bit on the stiff side.
Yeah.
And I wish I could say that my stuff flowed like a river, but it doesn't.
No,
My stuff's a little bit.
I think it's great for what it goes. Yeah, I think it's very great for what the actual story is. It's set in 1971.
If I tried to do a superhero like John Buscema used to do, I can't do that. Why would anybody buy a superhero story that I drew?
I did like you have put like a couple of the covers, like a little copies of the covers, like a Conan and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
no, those are like, I was like, oh cool.
Well, I can copy it for Zeta. There's actually one drawing in there. There's one drawing. It's around page 160 or so. Let me mention this first. The crux of the story is on the way down. Our hero helps out a guy who just happens to be a great comic artist. And I was talking to, do you know who Dave Sim is? Is his name still remembered?
No, I don't remember right now.
Okay, Dave Sim created Cerebus the Aardvark, and he was about the biggest thing going on.
I remember Cerebus the Aardvark. I remember that.
Okay, that's Dave Sim. Okay. So Dave Sim said, your Alan Caldwell character, the big-time pro, that's Neil Adams. Why didn't you just call him Neil Adams?
Because I'm sure Neil Adams would have sent you a cease and desist thing.
I wasn't even thinking of Neil Adams.
Wow, goodness.
But I made the challenge that I called him the second greatest comic artist of all time after Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby's a character in the story, too.
Right, I did see that.
So you're not giving people what they want if you don't show the artwork of the second greatest comic artist.
Right.
So I had to do a full pager of something that could have been done by the second greatest comic artist in the world. An Al Williamson, a Jack Davis, a Wally Wood. And I did that, and it's the best I can do. I did it very, very slowly. I inked it very, very carefully. And I put everything I had onto that one page. I took photos for both the figures in it. I went to a graveyard. It's two figures, sort of a zombie type of guy, and a beautiful woman in a graveyard. So I went to a graveyard, took photos of the graveyard. No comic artist could spend the time I had to on that to do a good drawing. They've got to do it just thoughtlessly. I gave it a lot of thought. So our hero, Harold Friedman, meets Alan Caldwell, the great comic artist. Alan Caldwell wants Harold Friedman to be his apprentice. Harold Friedman wants to go to school. Meanwhile, Harold Friedman meets a beautiful girl who falls in love with him. Who knows why, but she does. And that becomes the subplot. So they walk through the New York of 1971 and an early comic convention.
Which is kind of weird because you do explain in the comic book, too, that like the female to male ratio in the Comic-Cons back then were like...
There weren't any girls.
Yeah. It was like 100 to 1, something like that, if you're lucky.
They just didn't exist.
Yeah.
If they existed, you knew that it was a dealer's wife. I mean... And I talked to a young lady. I had a party here recently.
Right.
And there was a lady in her 20s who was into comics.
Right.
And most of the guys were not in their 20s. They were, up around my age. And she was saying that what happened was over the years, you got creators who did things that appealed to women. In 1971, they just weren't doing anything that appealed to women.
Exactly.
Maybe even Betty and Veronica, that appealed to 12-year-old girls. Didn't appeal to 18-year-old girls. So the number of women that we saw was almost none.
Right.
That's what it was like. And I would like to think that for the readers, it's interesting to get that piece of information. How it came to that. And at the time, people said that there were only about 500 people who would go to a comic convention or buy a fanzine. So if there were 500, and the San Diego convention now has about 170,000 people going to it,
right?
you just think of the growth.
Yeah, I remember my first introduction to Comic-Cons was still in the hotel setting.
Yeah.
But you can actually, like, Stanley was still approachable. You can actually, like, get a free autograph from him still back then. About the 80s maybe, when I was a younger. But it was still on a small scale. Like 500 people. It was a decent con.
Wow.
And now it's like like these big sprawling events, even in small cities. Like I'm here in Tampa, Florida, and we have two of them now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we have two different companies doing two different Comic-Cons. It's just out of control.
What we have is a variety of people doing little conventions every weekend, sometimes even 2 or 3 on a weekend, in not just Toronto, but every small town around Toronto. And there's a small town called Tillsonburg, which certainly you've never heard of.
No.
Tillsonburg has 12 to 15,000 people in it, and it's a tobacco town. That's where they grow tobacco, out in Tillsonburg.
Okay.
So they had a town fair, and I guess they get a merry-go-round. So they put up a merry-go-round and put up a Ferris wheel, and they have tractor pulls, and I don't know what they have at these things. But someone got the idea that they could attach a comic book convention to it. So you've got, that's how small they are now.
Nice. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they do.
Now that one would not. He claimed 2,000 people came. I didn't see 2,000 people. I thought there might have been 200 people over the weekend who wandered through the door. It was not a grand success from my point of view.
Right.
And I really doubt that he made any money. But you never know.
But those small cities back in the day wouldn't have even dreamed to try and do a Comic-Con like that.
Well, it's our culture.
Yeah.
It used to be a small subculture, and now it is the culture.
Yeah.
We won.
Yeah, we did.
We took over, film, television, fashion, design. You look at a cover of a New Yorker these days, it's comic art most of the time. We took over so many facets of society that people might even think it was always like that.
And that's great that this comic book shows that. It was very humble. It was like there wasn't even like comic book covers for your comic books. There was no bags and boards back then, right?
No, no. The bag. I checked that out on the internet. They were the bags were invented 4 or 5 years later after my story.
Okay.
And
they probably weren't even that
boards
good.
came after that.
I see.
So it's no surprise that when you look at those old comics, they're all scrubby and shredded.
Yeah. Like I have
people just stack them.
Yeah.
And hardly anybody stacked them top to bottom and front to back. That would have been an absolute freak. Yeah. Like, who did that?
Yeah, you did talk about a character there that was very meticulous. Yeah, one of the 5 is very meticulous about taking care of his comic books.
I had one friend, and I think I can tell you his name, John Lightman. He certainly was not someone meant to be in the story. But John had enormous insight into collecting comics and had good ideas of what would be worth a lot, and knew, as with coins and stamps at the time, that the ones in good condition would be the ones that would be worth a lot of money. And he sold them out. I don't know if he sold them at peak, but he sold them at a good price. And he bought movie posters with the money, and he sold the movie posters at a good price. He really understood that.
Wow.
I didn't understand it at all.
Yeah, and my dad used to read comic books. I was born in '77, so he lived that time, and he used to read comic books. So when I got a little older, I started showing him covers. Like I showed him Amazing Fantasy 15, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the covers, he was like, "Oh, I used to have that. Oh, I used to have that." I'm like, "Are you serious, Dad? Where are these books?" And he's like, "Oh, well, Grandma picked them up and threw them all away."
Oh my
God! I think I had to literally like lay in my bed for like a couple hours, just saying, "Oh my God, we could have been millionaires right now."
I bought my Amazing Fantasy 15 for $3.50.
Wow!
And I sold it for $7.50.
Oh man, I don't know. I think that's probably worse.
And then years later,
Uh-huh. The
like I
Spider-Man.
said, I'm nobody's going to take away the lettering from me. I can letter.
Right. Uh-huh.
So someone asked me, a friend of mine asked me for some logo designs. He was starting a business, and I did 2 logos for him. And his plan was to buy me a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15. So eventually, he knew nothing about comics.
Right.
He got my wife to ask me what comic I would have if I could buy any comic, and I said that was the one.
Right.
So he then found out that on eBay, an Amazing Fantasy 15 could cost anywhere from $2.50 for a reprint to tens of thousands of dollars. This was a while ago.
Right.
So I said, look, you did something nice for me. I'm going to give you a budget of $1,000 to buy one. So I bought one. I don't remember if it was $880 or $830, but $880 or $830. But I finally got my Amazing Fantasy 15 back.
What was the grade by any chance?
Oh, I can tell you exactly, 2.0.
Ah, that's perfect. I like that grade. Like I have an Uncanny X-Men, the first appearance of the Sentinels, as a 2.5 sitting on my wall.
Well, you don't have to worry when you touch it.
Yeah, no, I slabbed it already, so it's just sitting there.
What I did was I slabbed the extremely valuable ones.
Mm-hmm.
The rest I mean, most of mine are 2.0s, 2.5, same thing.
Right.
Generally, I tried to get them with the covers intact,
right,
and no ink on the covers.
Yeah, usually a 2.5, the cover looks decent.
Yeah.
It looks like somebody read it, somebody liked it enough to read it a bunch of times, and time has taken its toll on it.
So right now, my Amazing Fantasy 15 and my Amazing Spider-Man 1 are in the museum. The museum downtown is called the Royal Ontario Museum.
Oh, okay.
And they're doing an exhibit on the Spider.
Nice.
So they didn't call me. They phoned a guy who owns a comic store.
Uh-huh.
And said, we want to get the first appearances of Spider-Man. And he said, I think I know somebody who's got them.
Nice.
So they're on display in a big museum now with the Spider display. So it's kind of neat. You go down there, and my stuff's in a museum. It's not my stuff. It's Ditko's stuff, but I own it.
We need to get the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks in the museum. There you go.
Well, I'm getting that in a smaller museum. I've got a display in a smaller museum starting October 23rd.
Very cool.
But if you run around, you can get these things done.
Nice.
And the display is called Jews in Comics.
Okay.
And there's a synagogue in Toronto that's so large that it's actually got its own museum.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. So my stuff, I think, is going to be about 1/8 of the exhibit. As you walk in, there are going to be pictures of the poster from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And beside the poster of Guardians of the Galaxy will be the cover of Marvel Superheroes with the Guardians of the Galaxy on it from probably about 1967. And it's the same idea that these things started somewhere. Guardians of the Galaxy didn't come out full-blown as a movie.
Exactly.
It developed over, 50 years.
Right.
But in my book, what I'm trying to show is the key point in the development that comic books, by that time, people were just waiting for them to die. And comics were a business, a dying business,
right.
But they were an emerging art form. You were getting people involved in it who didn't think of it as just their job. Crank it out, make a bit of money today.
Mm-hmm.
Crank out another one. Maybe if you can keep doing this, you'll get a syndicated comic strip. You'll make a pile of dough.
You kind of explained that.
Most of them fought up until about the time of the comics. My story.
Right.
Then around that time, the business end of it was diminishing, and the art form end of it was jumping up. So the people who wanted to go into it weren't people who simply wanted to be artists. They wanted to be comic book artists.
Right.
And it was an exciting time. Not for me. I didn't have the chops. But around that time, a lot of my friends were going. Rich Buckler was not my friend, but Rich Buckler would have led the way for a lot of the guys in Detroit. Al Milgram, he was not my friend either, but I knew him. Arvell Jones was my friend. He got in. He drew lots of books for Marvel and DC. around that time. Terry Austin got in around that time. Locally, Ken Stacy got in. John Allison got in locally. Dave Ross got in. So the guys who had the chops at it seemed to be a young man's game.
Right.
The guys that had the chops were getting in. And I remember Arvell saying, "Oh, I did get a compliment." I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He's the same age as me. He's known for his highly detailed work. George Perez.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of George Perez.
Okay, George Perez said something about my work. I wasn't there at the time, but it was reported to me. At the time, I think the key to drawing comics is to be able to draw the human figure in any pose and make it exciting and do it quickly. That's got to be 3/4 of the battle. And it was a battle that I was not winning. I could draw a figure, and I could draw it neatly and make it look nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I could put a good ink finish on it. But it would have a mood, but it wouldn't be what comic books needed. So Perez saw my stuff. This would have been 1972. And he said, "This guy's too good for comics." Now, he didn't mean... Those were his words, but I know what he meant. He meant somebody who spends this long on a drawing, trying to make it look so pretty, is not what comics is after, is not what comics is. Comics is a storytelling method where the beauty of the drawing is secondary to the storytelling. And that's what I couldn't do. So I remember having conversations about, being an inker, and I did have a shot at that. I didn't pursue it. I went to university instead. Had a shot at it, though. And I did become a letterer, which I was very good at. But the idea of penciling a comic, those guys are magicians.
Yes,
you watch some of those people draw.
Yes.
And it's just, it's coming out of their head.
Yeah.
Like, I could do an okay
It's definitely
sketch,
a gift. A gift from God,
those
definitely.
Guys.
Yeah. Yes, it is. So you were nominated for a Schuster Award. How did that feel?
Yes, it felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the population of Florida?
I don't know. Let me pull out Google here.
Okay. Now, Florida is one of the largest states in America.
Florida, yeah,
the population of Canada is about
20.98
million.
Yeah, 20.98 million, Florida.
Okay. So there's some comparison can be made.
Yeah.
We're smaller than California.
California's like 39.54 million.
Yeah. It's not so getting nominated for an award is not at the level of getting nominated for an American award. The people who do the Eisners, they did not talk to me.
Well, it's just nice to get it nominated for anything, right?
This is a dynamite book.
Yeah.
They didn't say that, but it made a bit of a splash here.
Nice.
And only 9 people were nominated for Best Cartoonist. So I was one of those 9. I didn't win it in the end. A guy named Jeff Lemire, who really is good, he won. That's not a surprise to me. I don't know how the nominations are done. I don't know how they choose the final person. But Jeff Lemire was a fairly logical choice. Yeah. And one of my friends said, well, it wouldn't have been my choice. And my book might have even been better than Jeff Lemire's. But for that matter,
it's nice to be
the other
nominated.
7 could have all been better than mine.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to be nominated, right?
Nice to be nominated, yeah. Nice to be nominated.
So the last question I got for you is, how do you feel now that you lived this comic book, you've seen the fandom grow to what it used to be and to what it is now. And as an independent creator now, do you think that this is the new Wild West, the independent creator scene?
Well, that really is a question that I'm not all that qualified to answer. I did an independent creation, but I also found a publisher for it.
Right.
Some people have been doing Kickstarters and
Yeah.
other fundraisers.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's kind of
And
like
they've been having success
it's
that
like
way.
it's a shootout. It's kind of like and then somebody gets a breakout success, and then bam, they got a Netflix show about their project.
Well, yeah, it can happen.
Yeah.
But let's also remember that the people who are getting those things, they have ability.
Right.
I talked about the chops my friends had back around 1973. At least some of them had. Some of them were very, very good. Others should have known when to quit and didn't. Others knew when to quit and did. But what I see, at least in this area, is some people just have enormous talent. And the talent they have may develop into something that's very interesting and marketable. And I know that the market is not everything, but if I would have spent 2 years on this thing, I spent close to 2 years on it,
right,
and had 100 people read it. Well, I would have found some satisfaction in that, but I really wanted more people to read it, and that I did get more. I mean, it was published by Caliber.
Right.
They found a distributor through Diamond.
Nice.
It sold. It was up to number 16 in its category on Amazon. It actually got up to number 16. Several professionals have read it and written me. I wish I could call them fan letters. I can't, but supportive statements about it.
That's good. That's great.
The reviews have all been good.
Yeah, I'm about, I don't know, maybe chapter 4 in so far.
Oh,
and I'm still scratching the surface of the whole story, and I enjoy it. I'm enjoying it. I like
Thank you.
It's just it's a time of development of the fandom that I didn't live, so it's interesting to read it, and of course the story is not is fiction, but it's very interesting, like the just the way that the character's about to break out into the scene, with right now the creator who is giving him a shot. He told him to write out, go ahead and write a plot, and he's just writing like a random plot, and he presents it to him, and he's kind of like, all right, we're going to work with this, but it's not that great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's interesting, It's yeah.
One fellow said it's a page turner.
Yeah, it is.
And that's what I wanted. I wanted to tell a story that was interesting.
Honestly, I think it's like honestly, for me personally, I think somebody can make a Netflix show out of this. I'll be honest with you. It just has
Steven Spielberg
it has that
not
real
been returning my calls.
It has that real feel, to like something you would see like on, like a normal show like that, like.
Okay. I don't know where it'll go. Most of these things, I think they sell for about a month, and then there's a secondary market in the next month. The price drops somewhere, and after a couple of months, it's usually over. Now, this thing has been going for about a year and a half.
Right.
And I'm still getting checks.
Nice.
It's still moving.
There you go.
So
hopefully
I want to see.
Yeah.
But however, there's also the law of diminishing returns. That for about a year, I really tried to make it move with some success.
Right.
I mean, it didn't get to the New York Times bestseller list. Steven Spielberg didn't call.
It's okay.
But, it moved. I was a guest at a few conventions. I got it reviewed.
Nice.
I think that's that's positive. That's good. But the longer you spend at it, the less chance. If Spielberg doesn't call you in the first couple months, he's probably not going to. So I'm not running as hard after.
You never know.
New York Times bestseller list and all that stuff.
Well, hopefully we exposed the story to more potential readers, and hopefully they go check it out. Of course, it's available on Caliber Comics. Is it available on Amazon as well? They can get digital copies of it.
Yeah, and your comic store in this area, they're largely sold out. I don't know if any comic stores still have them.
Okay.
Well, one of them in Toronto sold 40 copies. I'm really happy about that. I don't know what they bought down there. It's worth a try. The comic
Definitely.
store is worth a try.
Okay.
And even if they don't have it, they can order it and might be able to get it quicker than you could get it on Amazon or through Caliber.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Very cool. And they can also get the digital through like Comixology or something like that?
It is available on Comixology.
Awesome. Great. All right. All right. Thank you so much, Ron Kasman. Thank you for your time. Thank you for talking about your project. Thank you for making this comic book. It's very interesting. Just the whole premise of the story is very interesting.
Thank you for your kindness, Louis.
Oh, you're welcome. And hopefully more people will check it out. Of course, it's titled The Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, and it's available anywhere digital comics are sold, pretty much. Amazon, Comixology, and try and find a physical copy if that's your thing as well, online. And thank you, Mr. Kasman, for your time. And hopefully, if you have any other new projects or you're working on anything new in the future.
Well, I am going to wait for this to play out.
Okay.
I've got a sequel written.
Nice.
I've got a story written about internet dating.
Yeah.
I do have a superhero story written.
Nice.
I've got another fan-based story written. And what's the other one? Oh, the other one is called From Moses to Elron. And it's about a Jewish kid who becomes a Scientologist. It's a nasty story. And I think it would actually sell like crazy. But I think the chance of my getting sued over it are probably greater than the chances of it selling like crazy.
We have them over here. I'm in Tampa, and they're in Clearwater.
Oh,
here.
Yeah. You guys are around the corner from Clearwater, aren't you?
Yep, it's the same metropolitan area. Yep.
Well, be careful.
They'll be all right.
Okay.
They can come after me anytime. All right. Mr. Ron Kasman, do you have any socials, anything that they can follow you on?
Yeah. I've got ronkasman.tumblr.com.
Okay.
And I've got a blog.
Awesome.
Now, just a second. I'm sitting in front of my computer, too.
No, it's okay. Take your time. Don't worry.
And I don't know the address of the blog, but I can tell you in a minute. Okay, here it is.
All right.
It's called The Tower of the Comic Book Freaks. .blogspot.com.
All right.
And what you'll get there is a 70-page preview of the book.
Nice.
Okay.
Awesome. And anything else? You're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah. I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah, go ahead and drop all that.
Just a minute.
Take your time.
Facebook. Let's see. I'm just clicking it all in so I can see it physically. Okay, there's a public group called the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks.
Nice. I'm going to join that right now.
Okay, and every day I wrote one essay about comic book storytelling. It's around Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, but it's about what I was thinking while I was doing a page.
Cool.
So there could be as many as 400 little essays up there with they're well illustrated. One of my friends told me that should be my next book, putting it together into a book on how to do graphic novels. And I said, you know how much work that is? I don't feel like doing all the prep for that. But it's up there on Facebook, the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, public group.
Okay, I see it. Yep, I just joined it right now. Awesome.
Oh, you just asked to join.
Yep.
Okay, just a second now. This is amazing.
It says I gotta answer
miles
these.
Away.
It says I gotta answer these questions. Hold on.
Okay, I do an approve all. Just a second. Confirm. Amazing. Did you just get back something that said you're now a member?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Okay, isn't that amazing?
Right, yes,
well, to a guy my age, it's amazing.
Right. So this.
Okay,
awesome.
you got it there, Louis?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I have it. Yep. I have been approved. Awesome.
All right. Cool.
So, it did say you're not posting anymore.
I'm not posting as much. I post every once in a while now.
A little warning.
I'm just going to go to it. Just a second. Okay, when I put up, the last thing I put up was, I said, this is the billboard that will soon be going up all over Toronto.
Right.
Do you know who Maxwell Smart is?
Maxwell Smart. Why does that sound familiar?
There was a show called Get Smart on TV.
Yeah, well,
and he used to tell horrible lies and then say, would you believe? And it would still be a lie. And then he'd say another, would you believe? So it says, this is the billboard that will soon be going up all over Toronto, changed to Maxwell Smart font. Would you believe once at the Windsor Con and at the end of the month, once at the Kitchener Con next month, small, sitting on my table. So it's just a little poster I'll have at 2 conventions coming up.
I like it.
And then if you go back a little bit, it's got the poster for the convention that I was co-chair of in 1972, which is up in a library in Toronto now.
Nice.
It's just, I mean, these things, people save these things.
Awesome.
Then there's a bit of discussion. There's a picture of my Amazing Fantasy 15 which is at the museum. A picture of the exhibit on Jews in the comic book industry, which is displaying the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a picture of John Voight. I was in New York. When would it have been? Would have been maybe May. And I was in Chinatown, and my son said to me, "Hey, Dad, I think that's Angelina Jolie's dad over there." So I looked. It was John Voight. And so I used Photoshop to sneak a copy of the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks into his right hand. But he was just in Chinatown walking around.
Yeah.
So I've got stuff like that.
Nice.
I've got this is one. I don't know how long you can stand me complaining.
No, it's okay.
But I was on. This is what Facebook is good for. I used to do work for Comico, and Comico had 2 incarnations. Their first incarnation was with people who were very easy to work with, and I enjoyed working with them.
Mm-hmm.
The second incarnation, I didn't enjoy working with them, and they stiffed me for about $500 bucks.
Comico, we used to do the Robotech comic books back in the day.
I'm sorry?
They used to do the Robotech comic books back in the day. The Macross.
Yeah, I think that was their first incarnation.
Yeah.
Second time around, I worked for them as a letterer.
I see.
And I did a big book. It took me a week to do, and they didn't pay me.
Oh, well, that's not cool.
No. And I figured, well, maybe they didn't use it and they were going out of business. I wasn't happy. They still should have paid me.
Exactly.
But in fact, I found out on the internet how many years later, 30, 35 years later, they did use it.
Wow.
And somebody sent me a couple copies of the book. So I put it up there, and I told my story about not getting paid. So that's more what I'm doing now on there. Every couple of weeks, every month, something interesting will happen, and so I'll put it up. But I was doing them every single day, fair-sized essays, putting them up.
Very, very cool. All right, so go check out the group, the Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, as well, also on Facebook. And thank you so much, Ron. Thank you so much for your time. And hopefully, when you get a new project, contact me, and let's get you back on the show. And have you talk about it some more, okay?
Thank you, Luis.
Right,
the pleasure is all mine.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.